Hello, everyone. Welcome to our intermission. We have Morgan Starr-Riestes with us here today. She's a therapist and coach. She has been making videos for us for our Instagram page for the last 3 months on nervous system regulation. And we decided it would be fun to have her back and have a 30-minute conversation about nervous system regulation. And we're going to kind of dive into why we talk about nervous system regulation. So welcome, Morgan.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good to be here.
Yeah, so glad you're here. So where should we start? Should we start with the why? I think some people, we've been hearing about nervous system regulation. Maybe some folks are like, why is this important to me?
Yeah. Well, at the deepest level, we are not just a brain sitting up in our heads. We're also an entire nervous system that takes in information and impacts our day to day. We, a lot of the times, I think in the past, have been taught that, we are this brain up in our heads. And a lot of therapy and self-help development has been on shifting our thoughts and, changing our thought patterns. And this is a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy. And so the field of psychology is starting to really recognize, oh yeah, we're a whole nervous system also. This goes into a lot of somatic work as well, that, traumatic experiences get stored in our bodies, and our nervous systems reenact these patterns over and over again. And it doesn't have to just be a traumatic thing happened and so, we're impacted. It can also be, hey, just so you know, on a day-to-day, there's going to be natural stressors that come up, and here's how my attention is impacted. Here's how my decisions are impacted. Here's how, my brain up in my head is impacted on a day-to-day. And I think that that's a really important part of the conversation that's starting to become a lot more accessible to people. So that's my why, is that we need our prefrontal cortexes online in order to make rational decisions and, empathically connect with each other and be able to come up with creative, solutions in times of conflict or whatever it might be. And if our nervous system is not regulated, then our prefrontal cortex is off. Right. And we are sort of working from more of that reptilian brain of survival. And that's so whenever we're in a dysregulated place, we're in more of a survival state, and we're not using our newest part of our brain that helps us be as amazing as we are as humans. So
I already want to go back and underline the part about connecting and problem solving. So with nervous system regulation, what I've noticed too is slowing down, because we are oftentimes saying all these things, and if we break it down and say, what does that mean? So that means if I'm in a dysregulated state, let's say I'm super anxious about doing this with you, and I'm having trouble connecting because my brain or my nervous system is basically in a dysregulated state. Let's say I'm how sometimes you can listen to yourself talk, and then all of a sudden you're like, I don't even know what I'm saying, So that could be happening. My heart could be racing. I could be thinking, all these things could be going on, and which is not allowing me to connect with you right here and now. So that's what we mean about the importance of nervous system regulation, is that when we have a regulated state, and so maybe everyone can even think about it, there's times where we know we feel calm and safe. And the difference between maybe when we have an interaction with a difficult customer or client, or I don't know, road rage, where we notice our heart's racing, and sometimes we don't think as well. And I noticed this, and I wanted to reference that because you did such a great video for us. And I would encourage anyone who's watching to go back and watch that. And maybe we could even do it about flipping the lid, and it's such good information.
Yeah, so that's the Handy model. That's by Dan Siegel. And if you're interested in somatic work, or he does such good work of just breaking down things in a very digestible way. So if you're interested in reading a book, or even watching his things on YouTube, Dan Siegel's a great resource just all around. But he uses this Handy model to have the brainstem, the oldest part of our brain, be that kind of more survival state. That's really what that part of your brain cares about. And then we've got our limbic system, which is really that relationship. It's sort of developed in more of like the mammalian brain. And then we've got our prefrontal cortex, which is helping us think more abstractly and helps us problem solve, have empathy,
Yeah.
etc. And so
Dream.
whenever we're in these, and I want to go back and speak to sort of that, the window of tolerance and sort of this optimal place you're talking about, sort of that calm, collected, really present place, like that's our optimal level of functioning. That's our window of tolerance. But whenever we're, natural stress is going to come up. So we can stay within our window of tolerance and still be stressed. Like we can feel stress. Like if you're feeling anxious right now, great, but you're not to a place where you're dysfunctional. And that's where, whenever we're
That's a
getting into
good point.
hyper or hypo aroused states and go outside of our window of tolerance, that's when our lid flips. That's when our prefrontal cortex turns off. And you might have been able to experience this, when an angry customer comes up and yells at you, their lid is already flipped, right? And I think that an important part of understanding that is, hey, their prefrontal cortex is off right now. I cannot rationalize with this person right now, because
Oh, that's so
their
good.
their limbic system is maybe the only thing intact, or they full, they're in survival state right now. They've felt threatened for some reason, and they are in a place that we can't. And I don't know if anyone else has experienced this, but you can tell when someone is like, I can't rationalize with this person right now. I think that that's really important to recognize when we're in those states, and also to know that our nervous systems will sync up with each other. And so it's so quick that once somebody else's lid flips, our lid's going to flip. Yeah. And so I think it's really important to understand this, to say, in order to make this go well, I need to keep my lid on.
Right. Right. And those are some of the cues we were like you did one on danger and safety. And so when we're thinking about, let's say we're working with the public, right? You can't always be in that perfect state. Like you mentioned, you brought in that distinction of like, you could be nervous and still be in a relatively regulated state. And also that person coming at you could remind you of a bad experience in your childhood or in your past. And that's going to trigger that reptilian brain, that fight, flight, or freeze. Right. And so the things that like you talk about in your videos, like the box breathing, for example, it might not work all the time, but what it could do is help give you a few precious seconds to kind of pause before reacting to somebody, because that is how things escalate. We see that on the news. We see it all over, where you're like, how did that happen so quickly? But that's what happens is two people come together. They're both dysregulated, and either a crisis happens. I mean, obviously people could go into collapse, but sometimes it's the other way. So
yeah, a lot of the times we find that, especially hyper arousal, which is sort of that more aggressive state, like, right, we're fighting. That's that survival state, is fight. And we see that whenever that happens, things can escalate very quickly. And sure, I think it's really important for you to know and sort of track within yourself of like, whenever I do get into dysfunctional states or feel like my prefrontal cortex is off, does it get me into a place of that anxiety? Both are hard to focus within, but having a little bit more aggression or a little bit more hyper activity, do I get into that place, or do I shut down? Do I get frozen? And yeah, the things that make the news are probably a little bit more hyper arousal.
Yeah, they probably are. But again, you're giving us a clue to how we can utilize this information in our everyday life. So I don't know the perfect quote, but there was a quote just about getting a little bit better every day. And I think sometimes when there's a lot of depression or anxiety, it can be overwhelming. Like, what do I do? Where do I go? But paying attention and realizing these kind of situations make me go out of that window of tolerance, which I encourage people to go back and find that video, because you do such a good job of explaining it. But basically the window of tolerance is that perfect, well, not perfect, that kind of that state
optimal. That's the word I use.
Yeah, that's a good word. But when do we get out of it? And then when do we go below it? And the below it is usually where we see depression show up, or lack of ability to make a change, stuck feeling. And your system could prefer that, or maybe it prefers anxiety, like for whatever reason. We don't have to go into all of that, but I do think systems end up preferring
Yeah,
one way
there's
or the other.
safety in one or the other,
Right.
right? It
That's
might
perfect.
feel safer to be able to fight, or it might feel safer to shut down, depending upon what you were exposed to growing up. And yeah.
Right. And so then that's a plug for how important safety is.
Hmm.
And I had to learn this, as I learned and went to school and et cetera, but we really could be learning this at a much younger age, that
Mm.
if your system does not feel safe, you will have psychosomatic symptoms, or maybe we should even use, you will have anxiety, you will have depression, you could have obsessive compulsive. I mean,
Hmm.
the list goes on and on of things that happen.
Hmm.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and I would say that even if you don't fit into a diagnostic criteria, you'll still experience dysregulation. Um,
Hmm.
and that's important to manage and know, you know, this does not make me feel safe. And that's in so
Right.
many different scenarios. That's within my relationships, within my work environment, within, just my even relationship with myself. Like, what do I
Absolutely.
need to feel safe? And what does threaten me? Right? Because that's going to change the way that you live your life and what you expose yourself to if you have that choice
Mhm.
to, like I'm not going to go to this particular work environment, or I'm not going to go to this particular relationship that doesn't allow my safety, or that I do feel consistently threatened over and over again. And I mean, this is such a nuanced topic, so it's hard to,
Sure.
we start getting into the weeds around, how each person needs to respond differently to their unique situations. But I
Mhm.
think just like on an overarching view, whenever we know for ourselves what safety means for me, because that's going to be unique for each individual's nervous system. For
Mhm.
me, the smell of mint helps me feel safe because of my associations that I've had over a long period of time in my life. But for someone, if they've had a traumatic experience around the smell of mint, that might be a trigger for them. That might be a danger cue. And so I think this is also another important part of the conversation, is that you need to know for yourself. Like, there aren't some blanket statement advice of like, here is what safety cues are. Here
Right.
is exactly what danger cues are. It's like, it's going to be unique to your situation. And I think that's why getting to know yourself and your nervous system is so important.
Mhm. Yeah, that's super clear. And when you start to have that information, then some of the tools that you gave us too, I would think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that would help, because you'd start to say, okay, I know, let's say you have a situation at your work, it's not perfect, and you don't feel safe, but you can't change jobs. Like right now, this is where you are.
Mhm.
You can start to bring in awareness of like, oh, this part's really hard. Like, let's say customer service. That's very tricky. If it, for the folks
Mhm.
out there who have to work with the population, it can be really
Mhm.
overwhelming.
Mhm.
And you might not be able to change your job or change all the situations, but it's bringing that awareness in of like, oh, this, I feel like this every time I go into that place of, where I work, or
Mm. Mhm. Well, and I think that this is a great point to also recognize what, perceived and actual safety is, right? If you have a customer that's coming up to you and is yelling, I think it's a really good split-second moment to say, am I in actual danger right now? Or am I perceiving that I'm in danger, right? Because if we can kind of walk ourselves through, okay, is this person actually coming and like swinging at me like that they're going to actually hit me?
right.
We don't want anyone to be in physical actual harm, right? I think that in that situation, I would even say that your work needs to maybe like help with, like a manager, like somebody needs to come out to help and support that, to make sure that you're not in actual danger,
Mhm.
right? And then, but if you are perceiving that you're in danger, then your nervous system's also going to respond with, hey, we're in survival mode, we need to fight,
Mhm.
right? And so I think that that's a really important distinction for ourselves. And this is where safety cues come in, is what ways can I say this person is upset, this person is in survival mode right now, and what ways, in my environment do I know help me feel safe? And I break this down in a video of, having that be a mental, emotional, and physical safety cue of some kind. So, it might be mentally, I know that I can call the cops. Mentally, I know that,
Mhm.
my manager's going to come help me, or
Right.
whatever it might be, to say I am not in actual danger right now, because I think we need to sort of talk ourselves down from that survival state when someone else is in it.
Mhm.
And we need to also be really good at distinguishing, is this actual danger or is this perceived danger? So that we
So
can respond appropriately.
yeah, that seems so important. And so what would be a recommendation to, because that seems like that might be hard at first when somebody's coming
Yeah.
at us, because there's a piece about awareness that has to come in where we're like, oh, okay, wait a minute,
Mhm.
persons. So those three things you were saying, mental, what were they?
Emotional and physical.
Physical. And those are, what, can you explain that part? Like what those are?
So I would say that this is sort of just a way to organize and break down. They might overlap in the same way, you know, like a mental and emotional might be similar.
Sure.
But I think a big part of this is really just recognizing what your resources are.
Oh,
You know,
perfect. Yeah.
because if you know, physically I am able to um, leave the cash register if I need to and go get my manager. Um, you know, that's like a physical safety, like I know I can do that.
Mhm.
Or physically, you can see that there's other people around you and that they're going to support you if something was needed. Um,
Mhm.
or, you know, whatever it might be, that might be physical examples. Emotional examples for me a lot of the time are being able to talk with my manager of like, hey, I have these feelings around this, or like, hey, what are my resources, so that I can in that moment emotionally know that I'm going to be taken care of.
Mhm.
And that, I think emotional and mental can kind of overlap a lot for me
Mhm.
personally, because once I mentally know what my resources are, it helps me emotionally feel a little bit more safe and cared for.
Right, because I think our systems recognize when we're caring for it,
Mhm.
right? Like you being able to say to your manager, you know, hey, I watched this interaction before, it made me really uncomfortable. What can I do if it happens again? Can I
Exactly.
leave my station and go get you? Can I press the emergency? But whatever it is, right? Because then you're telling your system, okay, yeah, I see that that was overwhelming, and we're going to have things that we can do to protect ourselves,
Mhm.
which kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning. Like this, the brain is here to protect us, to
Mhm.
keep us safe. So it develops and learns as it goes along, like what's safe, what's not safe. And it's like, one thing I read about the brain is it doesn't know time,
Mm.
which is why things can come back up and kind of, you know, overwhelm us again and again, let's say,
Mhm.
right?
Mm.
Because it's just knowing like, oh, this is overwhelming. But
Mhm.
once we go, okay, I know I get overwhelmed when too many people come up to me at once, let's say,
Mhm.
right? So I come up with strategies where I say to one person, I'm going to help you, and then I say to the rest of the people, you're going to have to go line up down there, or whatever it is. Like, you're getting to know yourself, just like you said,
Mhm.
knowing your resources, and then putting them in place to protect yourself,
Mhm. And
right?
then being able to, in those moments, say, hey, I've already created a map, I've created a plan of knowing that these are particular things that trigger me in these moments. I
Mm.
know that I'm going to use this resource, and yeah, bringing it back into that present moment. And maybe that is a resource of you taking that breath, like you were sharing before. Maybe that is a, hey, I know that I need to keep my prefrontal cortex on. I need to keep my lid on so that I'm able to perceive if this is actual danger or perceived danger, right? Like
Mm.
maybe that's the first step. And it's going to be different for each person around what they need.
Mhm.
And for some people, and this is a thing that I do, if I start getting into hypo aroused states, is I orient myself to my current time, location, and age. And it's
Oh,
going to be
that's so
different for
good.
each person and each scenario. So,
Right.
you know, use to your discretion. But it, like you're saying, the brain doesn't know time. A lot of the times, especially if we've, oh, that's really triggering to me because that person's talking to me just like my dad did way back in the day. Okay, now you're back to 5 years old in
Right.
your nervous system. And it can really be helpful to say, hey, system, do you know what today's current time is? Do you know where I currently am? And, you know, time is including like literally the date
Mhm.
and a year. And then, you know, location, where am I physically? Because that might be different than where you grew up or where your dad currently is,
Mm.
right? And do you know that I am currently this old? Because sometimes our nervous systems really do get caught in a loop of feeling like we're 5 and we have no resources, where it's like, oh, okay, no, in today's world, I am this old and I have these resources. And I think that that's where the safety and danger cues can come in of like, oh, and here's my resources.
Oh yeah, that's so excellent. And I want to talk a little bit about that, but I also want to remind everyone who's watching, some of these will work for you and some of them won't. So it's really about getting to know yourself. And we have, you posted, I think we posted 2 a month for the last 3 months. So there's plenty of videos. And then also people can go and watch your videos. There's so many, there's so much good information so you can choose. But I think that one about everyone can try that one, you know, that's an easy one to try. The next time you feel overwhelmed, you can say, you know, I'm X years old. I'm, you know, it's August 9th, 2023. Right.
Yep.
And that's telling the system, like, actually, we're far away from that threat that we're perceiving as a threat. That's not really a threat.
Yeah.
It's a threat to the nervous system, but it's not really a physical threat.
Yeah.
For the most part. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. And that helps you really get back into your optimal level of functioning, which is that window of tolerance, which is, I mean, essentially a present state. Because your brain's trying to protect you of saying, hey, I had this past experience, I'm going to apply it to this situation. Where in reality, you know, keeping that prefrontal cortex on it helps us say, what ways is this scenario different? And sometimes we really do need that distinction so that we don't carry in a situation that isn't the same to this one, right? Because we can kind of overlay a narrative or sort of a story that we have about something that happened in the past onto this one, where maybe it's not accurate anymore. And so that gets into the nuance of, you know, each person is going to have different tools that work for them. And these are sort of, you know, more broad stroke suggestions here. So,
well, yeah, I mean, one thing I've noticed with the intermission, like when we're talking with folks, it always comes back to the more we know about ourselves, right? And the more awareness we can bring in. And again, just like to remind everyone, awareness is hard when you're overwhelmed. So if you're watching this video and you're like, no, this won't work for me, it's finding moments when you're calmer to come back to the information, or to say, okay, I'm going to really try to do box breathing or orient myself the next time I get overwhelmed. And what I tell clients, I say, it doesn't matter at the beginning if it was 24 hours later. As soon as you remember that, you know, you've flipped your lid, you know, you lost your, I say sometimes lost your mind, but as soon as you realize, even if it's a day later, it does not matter, because it's the practice and the awareness. So then you say, oh, wow, that, you know, I was on the road and I was honking my horn and I was really angry. I was out of my mind. Oh, okay. What, you know, even just that awareness helps so that the next time you'll remember, oh, that's right, I did this before. I had gotten overwhelmed, and I think that helps. So like, just like even making small incremental changes, or not even changes, but small incremental awareness, you know?
Yeah, because that's where a lot of it needs to start. And the more that we do practice having that awareness, and the more that we do practice seeing, oh, wow, that really did help, or, oh, you know, I'm just going to give this a shot and see what differences it, you know, may make. The more that we can make that awareness shorter and shorter, to where it starts to happen in the moment of like, oh, I'm feeling myself getting dysregulated. Here are my tools. But it does take practice. It takes a lot of repetitions. And I just want to reiterate that, because, you know, a lot of the times we forget that this is building new neurological pathways to how we respond to stressful situations, or in, you know, whatever is happening in our environment, and to be able to adapt differently than we have once learned. And we've been doing that our whole lives through learning how to walk and talk and eat. And I think we forget that, you know, it takes a toddler over 2,000 steps to learn how to walk. And now it might be a little bit more automatic, but it takes a lot of times of falling also.
Mhm.
I've heard that the average toddler falls about 20 times an hour
Oh
when
my
learning how to walk,
God.
which I
I
think is just a really good awareness of like, hey, if I didn't do it 100% right that first time, that's okay. This is all a learning process, or what are you going to tell a toddler when they fall down? You get back up and you try again. And eventually it does become a lot more automatic. But
Mm.
it does take a lot of repetitions. And I think once we get to be adults, we're thinking, oh, well, we have to do it well, or, oh, I'm broken if I can't do it right now. It's like, well, let's zoom out and like, what would you tell a toddler learning how to walk? It's the same process. It's just at a different time in life and over, different neurological pathways. It's more, behavioral versus sort of motor functioning, but it's the same
Mm.
process in a lot of ways.
Right. And so there's even clues in there about being kinder to yourself, which is regulating,
Hmm.
right? When you can say, oh, I'm learning, this is a new skill. I'm learning this new thing. I've heard it equated to learning a new language,
Hmm.
which when you put it in that frame, if let's say you were to go to Mexico and you didn't understand Spanish, let's say, but you were mad at yourself for not understanding it, but you never learned it. You were never taught it. And then all of a sudden you're expecting yourself. And I think a lot of those, I mean, that's a whole conversation about shame, but I do think it's important to bring up because I think we expect ourselves to know this information. And really the nervous system information is very relatively new.
Hmm.
Um, and there was so much cognitive thinking, therapy, thought,
Hmm.
like there's so many books that were out there about change your habits and, you know,
Yep.
and it's
Yep.
like it's really hard to do unless there's a lot more awareness and then that ability to see like it's building blocks as well. Like,
Yeah. Well, and I think that this is really also a big part of, we have a very intellectual culture, right? Even if you're scrolling on TikTok, you might, or, read the self-help book, or even in this podcast, you can take in information. You can, intellectually understand something, but it really takes practice. It takes embodied practice to actually see a change. So if you're thinking in your mind, like, oh, well, I know all this information, but it's not working, I would
mhm.
really challenge you to, what ways can I implement this into my day to day? Like just once a day, at least practice what it physically feels like to speak the language. Or like imagine if you as a, child, I know this wouldn't be the case because you're not cognitively there yet, but imagine thinking about walking and not actually practicing taking the steps. It's like we have to do that part. And that it is absolutely unavoidable that you will fall. I mean,
Mhm.
period. I think that that
Absolutely.
just needs to be normalized, that
Mhm.
that learning something means failing at it, and there is a learning curve to it.
Yeah.
Um, and there is a certain amount of commitment that we need to have with ourselves to say, I know that I'm going to look silly sometimes. I know that I'm going to maybe not do that right or whatever it is. And that's part of the learning process. Uh,
Mhm.
and that there's a huge payout on the other end.
It massive.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Right.
it's really massive because you get more control over your responses and your reactions. That's really what we're talking about, is the ability to be able to say, okay, I don't want to yell at that
Mhm.
person. I want to be able to calmly solve that problem. And
Mhm.
that's how you get there, is these little uh incremental steps.
Mhm.
It made me, what keeps coming to my mind is the orientation, the like orienting to your space. So I can't remember if you did one for us, but like noticing 3 to 5 things in
Mhm.
your
Yeah. I
environment.
didn't do a video on that, but yeah, that's a great
Right.
way to get engaged with your present moment, right? Is finding things that you can hear, things that you can see, things, engaging your senses. And maybe giving yourself a challenge to do that if you are feeling overwhelmed. Although I do feel like that is very cognitive, like it can be, like, okay, find red things in the room right now. And that can be very cognitive, where you might need something that's very visceral, like physiological at that moment if you are dysregulated. It just depends on what works for you,
Yeah,
So
for
for,
sure.
for I'll share just one of my absolute favorites, and I know that it's not for everyone. I used to actually not enjoy breathing exercises and things. I used to also not enjoy cold exposure. So it's actually, but I do both of those things now. So I just want to share that like your process can change, and it just sort of playing with whatever works for you. But in today's world, if I ever get start to feel anxious, if I start to feel that hyper arousal, I start going into a physiological sigh. And so this actually has a lot of research around it as one of the quickest ways that our body naturally wants to breathe to relieve stress, and keep us in our window of tolerance. You'll even see like dogs use it, or you might even notice that you naturally do this.
Mhm.
So it has two parts. The inhale is, fill your lungs all the way up to the top, and you can do this with me if you feel like just feeling the difference.
Mhm.
So inhale all the way up to the top, and then right at the top, we're going to add another breath. So, and then exhale, and we're going to make some sort of noise like a sigh. And just doing that one more time because I know I talked through that. So
Okay.
inhale up at the top, and exhale with some sort of noise. And just noticing how quickly
Yeah.
something like that can really reset where
Mm.
you're at. That really helps me a lot. But like I said, it's sort of at one point in my life, I would have laughed at me to be like, that doesn't work. So,
Right. Right.
do what helps. And some of it is trial and error for your own self. I would say
For
that
sure.
there is no blanket statement,
Yep.
advice out there. So,
Yeah, I think there's lots of videos that you've done on your platform where you can go and try them out. And I think that's a good indicator too, is like how you to pay attention just the moment after, because some of them aren't, you're right. There's some exercises I'll do them and I'm like, okay, I don't feel that one. The physiological side, I definitely feel. The box breathing one, which
mhm.
I know you did a video for us. That's a really good one. But again, like you said, everyone has to find it. So, and
Mhm.
that's
And
really important.
there's all these different categories too, right? I mean, breathing is one category of nervous system regulation, right?
Right.
We can also do cold exposure, we can do bilateral stimulation. So going through those videos and seeing, what does help me, especially if you break down, okay, I know that I'm somebody that gets into hyper aroused states. Like what are because that's more, you may need an energy release,
Right.
versus if you're in a hypo aroused state, which you're more shut down, like you might need more activation, right? Where if you're in a hyper aroused state and you get more activated, it might actually amp you up, right?
Right.
So I think a part of this is like the nuance of knowing yourself and what works for you.
So I'm just going to say it back to you in different language. So
Okay.
if I am prone to depressed states, right, then I might need one of yours, which I think would have been like the shaking would help me.
Yep. Yep.
Right.
Release in that
So
way.
that's the hypo arousal where you're in some kind of freeze or collapse. And or we don't even have to use those words. If you feel stuck, if you feel sad, you don't feel motivated, that's where that is. And so the shaking, and what about is it the gorilla pat? Wait,
Yeah, like gorilla thumps.
yeah, the gorilla thumbs, that's right. So
Mhm.
the gorilla thumbs might be one. But then if you are prone to anxiety, feeling like overwhelmed, feeling too much coming in too fast,
Mhm.
you might need the breathing because that will help your system come down.
Yep.
So that's a really good distinction. We're almost out of time, but that's a great one to end on, of like learning those. And you can have both states. You can go anxiety and depression. People oftentimes have both.
Mhm.
That's really
Yeah,
common.
definitely. And we can fluctuate between. And I think it's really just, and yeah, you're going to find the right fit for you. And all you need is a couple of tools to really start practicing and repetizing. And I guess I'll leave it on this because we had kind of spoken to this a little bit before, is that, practicing this stuff proactively before you need it is going to help build neural pathways and give you repetitions before you need it so that it's actually easier in those moments to say, hey, I've already practiced this. It's like you don't need to, it's like practicing before a test.
Mhm.
Right? You're
Mhm.
in the moment that you super need that, you're taking the test,
Right.
right? So we need to practice and get some flashcards in there beforehand so even if you are feeling in a calm state, what is it like for you to do some tapping? What is it like for you to do a couple of breaths? What is it like for you to do the last 30 seconds of your shower cold,
Mhm.
right? Proactively before you need it. And then you can respond when you do need it. And also coming back to it, like you were saying earlier, of if you just when you notice it, oh shoot, I got into hyper arousal earlier. Let me actually practice some regulating now, right?
Mhm.
So just embodied versus just knowing it intellectually, bringing it into your body and practicing that skill before and after, right? It doesn't have to just be during the time that you need it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it also cues the body up to start to, that's the awareness of like, okay, I can feel myself going in that direction. So let me do the
Mhm,
different things and maybe I
mhm.
can come down. And then the last, I mean, we'll go now, but this has been such a good conversation, Morgan. Just encouraging everybody to keep trying and to find what works for you, and to know, like, we try to have the beginner's mind. We are learning a new language here,
Mhm.
and it's going to be different how we learn and go forward with it. But we'd love to hear from folks, and if you ever have any questions, please reach out. Morgan, thanks so much
Thanks for
for this.
having me.
Yeah, it's been really wonderful working with you. The content you gave us is really important, and I'm so excited that we have it up on our Instagram where people can go and see it, and that we're connected in this way.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
happy to share.
yeah,
Thanks
thank you
for all
so
the work
much.
that you're doing. I think it's really important. Yeah, because I know that this stuff can be inaccessible sometimes to people. And so that's a big
Right.
part of my goal. And it sounds like a part of your goal too, is just to help some of this get outside of a paywall, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We created intermission for our folks that are in the film industry with us, because we want them to see, like, we're here learning as well. And I mean, I really believe our lives can get better incrementally, like just a little bit of practice at a time. And that's why we do this content. So
Mhm.
well, thank you again, Morgan.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
And thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.